Hi, I'm Harry Steinmetz. I'm a criminal defense lawyer here in Tacoma.
And my name's Ned Jursek. I'm also a criminal defense lawyer here in Tacoma.
And we're talking law. So, people want to know about marijuana DUIs.
Well, obviously in Washington State, the marijuana laws are new. There's an issue about how much marijuana is in your system and what triggers that marijuana DUI law. And it seems like the number was pulled out of thin air.
Mm-hmm. Now, it was a compromise in the legislation that passed in order to give you a specific number to the police. And it really has absolutely nothing to do with your level of intoxication. More importantly, your impairment to drive an automobile.
And when a police officer pulls you over for any reason, let's say it's an equipment violation, you've got a tail light out, let's say it's because of something in your driving, there's something that's going to trigger his concern about whether or not you've been driving under the influence of marijuana. So maybe if we could talk just for a minute about kind of that issue of probable cause and what gets an officer interested in you and your driving and your impairment.
Yeah. Well, the first thing you do, roll down your windows, because you want to get the smell of it, whatever it is, alcohol or marijuana, out of your car. I mean, even if you haven't been smoking anything, but you've been at a party where you have marijuana, then roll down the windows, let that car air out.
One of the top things that police officers look for when they walk up to your car, or should I say smell for, is the presence of any illegal substances. And in every DUI report I've ever read, it's almost like a cut and paste. It's notice the odor of alcohol in the car is where they begin, then notice the odor of alcohol on your breath. And they're all working towards, this moment where they can start to question you about your drinking or your smoking, and they can arrest you and try to test you.
And, the eyes are the other thing that really get them. Sometimes your eyes are going to be tired at the end of the night, particularly if you're wearing contacts. If you've been in a smoky environment, it's going to be aggravated. But they'll say your eyes are red, bloodshot, and watery. Constantly.
And that's like a cut and paste. I mean, it's in every officer's report that I've ever seen on these issues. And they're going to begin to ask you certain questions. And the most important thing to know right off the bat is you don't have to answer them.
Absolutely not. Answering is completely voluntary. They're supposed to tell you that. They find very casual ways to tell you that so you don't realize it. And all of a sudden you're starting to have a conversation with this cop thinking you're going to explain your way out of it. You're not. Just saying, officer, I'd rather not answer those questions.
And sometimes they'll get pushy. They'll get demanding. Well, why don't you want to answer them? What if you got something to hide? They'll push you and try to break down your resistance and get you to talk and essentially, try to get you to give evidence against yourself.
That's right. And the key is remain calm. You don't ever want to give them a reason to, suspect or to get physical with you or to be resistant. Don't give them an attitude. Just say, I'd really rather not talk about that right now. And leave it at that.
And I've always found from my own personal experience and from experience with clients, that those clients who are respectful and calm are often treated much better by law enforcement and will often get a better result at the side of the road than another client might. Because if you become a jerk, if you become argumentative or combative with the officer, that often gives them additional justification, even sometimes legally, to detain you and to continue to question you and try to gather evidence against you. And it also gives them a personal motivation. Like now, okay, this guy's been a jerk to me. He's coming home with a DUI tonight.
And then the next thing they do is they ask you to step out of the car. Comply with that. At this point, you may be wanting to stand on your rights. It won't do you any good. They're going to get you out of the car one way or another. Once they get you out, they're going to ask you to do some field sobriety tests. They're going to ask you to do what's called a horizontal gaze nystagmus test, and they're going to ask you to do a portable breath test, which a little clip they have in the belt. These are all entirely voluntary. You have absolutely no reason to give them those tests.
And if it's marijuana is the concern, and the officer is training as what's called a drug recognition expert, they're going to try to use tests to gain additional evidence to justify drawing your blood so that it can be analyzed for marijuana. And again, they can look for that arbitrary number of nanograms in your blood that has no relation to how you were driving or your level of impairment. And it's a trap.
It is. It's all designed to get the officer to collect information that they will use against you. And you just politely decline.
So what happens when you do decline?
Well,
They get pushy.
yeah, they get angry. And it's an intimidating and frightening thing to have an angry police officer because you're not obeying his commands. And ultimately, the police officer knows the limits of the law and what he can and can't do, but they hate being told that. And they don't like it when citizens know that, frankly, because their job is to get evidence against you. And so that's where the difficulty in just remaining calm and polite comes into play, and just, no, sir. And often their response is, well, if you don't do it, I'm going to arrest you. And I think that the smart answer to that is go ahead.
If you've got probable cause, you feel you have probable cause, go ahead. Just turn around and put your hands behind your back. Be cooperative. It won't hurt you in the long run. It's inconvenient as all get out. Because now you got the car by the side of the road, you've got cuffs on, you're going down to the station, but don't give them a reason. Don't give them a reason to aggravate or to escalate things up.
And when they take you into the station, again, be cooperative, be polite. You're going to be presented with forms by law enforcement, one of which is a questionnaire that a lot of them will use, asking you questions about your drinking or marijuana consumption that evening. I would decline all of those. You don't have to answer any of those written questions either.
And then eventually you're going to get to the breath test. Now, what do you do about the breath test? Because it's not an easy question to answer, and you're under a lot of pressure. The risk is that the Department of Licensing can suspend your license for up to a year if you refuse to take that breath test. That's a long time to be without a license, and Washington State has a lousy public transportation system.
And when I was a public defender, we had what was called DUI beeper duty. You have the right to talk to a lawyer, and at the time of your arrest and before you take that breath test. And I would strongly suggest to everybody, take advantage of that. When you call that number that the police department will have and are supposed to have on hand, you'll actually get to talk to a lawyer before you take the test. And that lawyer will have questions for you that are privileged, that remain between you and him, about your drinking that night, about the circumstances around your arrest. And that lawyer will be in a position to give you advice about whether or not to take the breath test. And when I was a lawyer doing those calls as a public defender, our overwhelming advice, and we used to call it in our office shorthand, shut up and blow, is you don't answer questions, you don't cooperate. There are all kinds of ways to attack the reliability of a breath test or a blood draw. Because if it's marijuana, they'll go seek a warrant by telephone and take a blood draw sample at a nearby hospital or clinic. Again, you cooperate with the test, but you don't say anything.
But also, time is your friend. All of this time when you're talking to the lawyer, you're making your decision, time is your friend. If it is a breath test that you're doing, they've got 2 hours from the time of the driving to have a valid breath test, for example. If they're going to go seek a blood draw, it's a much longer time frame. It's not an arbitrary 2 hours or anything like that. But again, your body is processing and metabolizing whatever it is that's in your body. So those are your friends.
And what we find overwhelmingly in the DUI, alcohol and marijuana cases is typically you will not be booked into a jail. Typically, once the ordeal is over, they'll write you a citation citing you with the alleged offense that they're claiming you've committed. But most of the time, you're not going to even be spending a night in jail.
And this is especially true if you've been polite, if you've been calm, if you've given them no reason to be mad at you. Because, boy, if you were a jerk, you're going to find yourself behind bars.